The tenant of the abandoned house. Amy had planned a short online accommodation service getaway to a small town in the west of Ireland, hoping to escape the relentless stress of city life. London's suffocating crowds had drained her. She had practically forced her boss to grant her leave, needing time away from people, from noise, from the ceaseless demands of daily life. Her mother, whom she had lived with, had passed away, leaving her with no one to share her burdens. Her psychologist had suggested that even a week away from the city, listening to her own thoughts might do her some good. The listing described the old revolutionary house, a stone building nestled in rolling green hills, isolated from any town or city. According to the description, the house dated back to the 19th century, had undergone some repairs, yet still retained its historical charm. It seemed to promise the perfect escape. What could be better for someone seeking solitude than a house that had stood for over a century? The thought made her chuckle. 10 minutes later, she had already booked her flight. The journey had been more complicated than she had expected, flying from London to Shannon Airport, then taking a bus to Galway, and finally renting a car to reach Connemara. She cursed her psychologist for convincing her this trip was a good idea. Exhausted, she just wanted to get to the house. Driving through desolate, rocky, and misty roads to reach Clifton, where the house was located, she laughed to herself at her choice of a peaceful retreat. When she arrived, a damp scent and the coolness of old stone walls greeted her. The key had been left exactly where the listing had indicated, beneath a flower pot by the front door. The house was larger and darker than she had expected. The wooden floors creaked, faded portraits lined the walls, and a broken chair sat by the fireplace, all suggesting the place had been abandoned for some time. Too exhausted to explore, she dropped her bags by the door and collapsed onto the bed, still in her clothes. She slept for about an hour and a half. When she woke, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the stone walls. Her stomach growled in hunger, prompting her to venture outside to explore the area. She found a small rundown restaurant and stepped inside. Several tables were occupied, the patrons engaged in lively conversation. While waiting for her meal, she curiously eavesdropped, wondering what small-town folk chatted about. But then, she noticed an old woman sitting alone in the corner, staring directly at her. Uneasy, Amy averted her gaze, pretending to rummage through her bag. When the waiter brought her food, she lifted her head to thank him, only to flinch in shock. The old woman was now standing right beside her. "May I join you?" the woman asked, seating herself without waiting for a response. Up close, the woman's appearance startled Amy. Though elderly, she was strangely well kept, her features almost too sharp, too alert. "I haven't seen you here before. Are you visiting?" the woman asked. Amy nodded, confirming she was a tourist. Though wary at first, she soon found the woman's manner warm and engaging. They fell into easy conversation, discussing local sites and places to eat. The woman seemed pleased to have someone new to talk to, as though starved for different company. Then, in the middle of their pleasant conversation, the woman casually inquired about Amy's accommodations. When Amy mentioned the location of the house she had rented, the woman's face turned deathly pale. Her breathing grew shallow. She leaned in and whispered, "Don't stay there, child." Her voice was urgent. "People come and go, but no one stays long. Take my advice. Get your things and find a hotel." Amy felt a chill creep over her. The abrupt change in the woman's demeanor unsettled her. Why ruin their conversation with such ominous remarks? She thanked the woman and quickly left. But as she exited, she glanced back, only to find the old woman watching her with an expression of sorrowful pity. Returning to the house, Amy poured herself a glass of wine from a bottle she had bought at the market. Propping her feet up on a small wooden table, she drank until the world felt pleasantly distant. She didn't want to read, didn't want to think. She just wanted the silence. At some point, she dozed off, only to be startled awake by a noise. At first, everything seemed normal, but then an unnatural stillness settled over the house. The wind rattled the windows, the fireplace crackled, but something else was there. A sound from the kitchen. the unmistakable creaking of cupboard doors opening and closing. Heart pounding, she tiptoed toward the kitchen, flicking on the light. Nothing was out of place. As she turned to leave, she noticed something on the floor. A note. "Do not turn it off. He is watching." The handwriting was shaky and aged. A cold dread washed over her. Who had left this? Tossing the note into the trash, she tried to dismiss it, rationalizing that it must have been left by a previous guest. Yet the woman's words lingered in her mind. That night, she slept with every light in the house turned on. The following morning, she walked into town, hoping to find the old woman again. She needed answers. Spotting her at a cafe, Amy hurried over, embarrassment flickering as she realized she had never asked the woman's name. But when she greeted her, the woman simply frowned. "I'm sorry, dear. Do we know each other?" Amy blinked in shock. "What? We spoke just last night, at the restaurant. You warned me about the house." The woman's expression remained blank. "I think you must be mistaken, sweetheart. I don't recall meeting you." Amy felt a chill crawl up her spine. She mumbled an apology and hurried away, feeling foolish. Perhaps she had misjudged the woman's odd behavior. Maybe she was just senile. That night, as she removed her makeup in the bathroom, she glanced at the mirror, only to see a shadowy figure behind her. She spun around. Nothing. But that night, the dreams began. The same shadow, the same hollow eyes, lurking in reflections, standing at the foot of her bed. She thought that the struggles she had endured in the crowded city had begun to push her into hallucinations here, and that her subconscious was now trapping her within her dreams. She picked up her phone to call her psychologist, but immediately changed her mind. If necessary, she would extend her vacation by a few more days and return completely cleansed. Amy had spent a wonderful day. She had explored most of the town and even managed to make a few friends among the local youth. They knew the elderly woman Amy had spoken to before, describing her as someone mostly quiet but a bit eccentric. This reassured Amy. By the third night, Amy resolved to enjoy herself despite her nerves. A drink, some music, and a book. The crackling of the burning logs in the fireplace brought her comfort, and the light spreading through the room cast beautiful patterns on the stone walls. Her feet ached from wandering the town with the young locals. She felt a pang of disappointment, realizing she was no longer as fit as she used to be. Just as she was about to take another sip, a shadow drifting in the kitchen caught her attention. Something seemed to be moving in the darkness. Slowly, she stood up, grabbed the iron fireplace brush, and walked toward the kitchen with careful, steady steps. Just as she was about to step inside, the door suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang. Overcome with fear, Amy sprinted toward the front door, desperate to escape, but it was locked. She couldn't find her keys. She rummaged through her bag, checked the table, scanned the entire room, yet the keys were gone. Her eyes flickered back to the kitchen door. She reached for her phone to call someone, but there was no signal. Panicked, she tried to force open the garden gate, but it wouldn't budge. At that moment, she heard a deep, guttural sound from the kitchen, almost like a scream. "Open the door!" Her heart pounded violently as she turned back toward the living room. On the table, the note she had thrown away yesterday was lying there again. But this time, an extra sentence had been added. "He is watching. Open the door." Just then, the sound of frantic footsteps echoed from the attic. Something was racing back and forth above her, moving erratically. Her eyes widened in terror as she looked up. The old wooden hatch in the ceiling was slowly creaking open, and from the darkness, a rotting hand slowly reached down. Amy let out a blood-curdling scream and bolted toward the front door, pounding and kicking at it. Then suddenly, the door swung open on its own. She dashed outside, gulping in the freezing night air as she ran frantically. When she finally dared to look back, the lights inside the house flickered off one by one. But at the doorway, it stood there. Its face was swallowed by darkness, but its eyes, cold, empty, and ravenous, were locked onto hers. Barefoot and trembling, Amy wandered through the dark until she reached the town center. She alerted the authorities, and the police arrived to check the house. But there was no sign of anything unusual, no disturbance, no evidence. The online accommodation service listing had already been taken down. The supposed owner of the house, a man who had gone missing years ago, and when they checked Amy's credit card transaction, they found that the payment had never even been processed. Amy never fully understood whether what she had experienced was real or not, but sometimes late at night, when she looked in the mirror, she could still feel those eyes watching her.